Welcome into a new BuffStampede Radio. Adam Munsterteiger, the publisher of BuffStampede.com, joined today by Sean Niehoff, who was in the press box for most of the games with me this past season. Unfortunately, was not in the press box for CSU. That was on them for having a small press box, but it was great covering this team with you, Sean, and I can't wait to recap what we experienced here these last 5 months, really.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Always enjoy doing it with you. It's fun to get that perspective. Sit in the press box. I think the one downside to that is that for those couple of games that I'm not in the press box and I'm watching from home and doing my thing, I think I've forgotten or lost the ability to be a fan. There's no cheering in the press box, and now there's, when I'm watching on TV, there's no cheering at home either. I've got kind of disengaged from that standpoint, and I'm sitting on my hands. But no, I really enjoy what we did. It was a fun season. It's fun to look back on it too, and just think about where, I know you mentioned it in your podcast with William, but to think where we both were back at the end of the 22 season. And I think the last game that we covered, I had mentioned to you that I thought I was done, and really it just wasn't fun anymore. There were only so many times you could write the same story and try to spin the ugliness that was CU football at that point in time. And it was, I think less than 2 weeks later when you reached out and called me and said, "Hey, I'm kind of hearing this rumbling, and if this happens, would you consider coming back? Would you be interested?" And then, we touched base another couple of weeks later when you're like, "I think this is going to happen." And at that point in time, it's, I felt like I would have been foolish not to come back, even if it didn't work, right? There were going to be stories to tell. It was going to be fun. There was going to be excitement and energy around it. And, I think to this point in 2 years, it's what's happened with the program, what Prime has managed to do has exceeded, at least my expectations, if not everybody's.
It's great you said that, because the number one thing on my overall takeaways from the 2024 season was that football is fun again in Boulder.
Right.
Like that has to be the main takeaway. Like, we're going to get into the Alamo Bowl, leaves a bad taste in your mouth going into the off season. But man, like to go out to Arrowhead Stadium and have Colorado as part of the college football playoff discussion, even though that didn't go as well, but like,
right.
Colorado put themselves in a position that we just have not seen this program be in a really long time. And to me, that was the main takeaway from this season. And you've got this complicated situation going forward where you have to replace two of the best players in college football and try to improve as a program. But if you lose sight of what we experienced from an enjoyment standpoint this past year, frankly, I don't understand why you're a college football fan, because that's even like you talked about being in the press box and having to sit on your hands. Like, I still felt that stuff internally. And if I didn't, there's no way you could do this job.
Oh, for sure. And I do think Prime, really summed it up well. When he talked about the differences between 23 and 24, in the years prior, I think there was some very couched hope that everybody had going into a season. It's a new season. You never know if they catch lightning in a bottle, things could be good. But it was hope that was quickly, that was dashed as soon as you saw them take the field. And sometimes that was during fall camp and sometimes even as early as spring ball, right? And last year they did, they built some legitimate hope that this was a team that was close. Every coach says it, but this was a team that was really close to taking that next step after 23. And they came out, and I think they showed early in the season that they were capable of doing that. They were definitely not a finished, polished product. There were still some challenges, but they turned that hope, over the course of the season into expectation. And then, the big losses they had ended up being, disappointments rather than rather than a feeling of hopelessness and embarrassment. It was disappointing because you knew that they had the ability to do that, and it leaves you going into next year, even though you've got some big pieces to replace, with a real feeling of expectation, versus falling back on, well, I hope they can do something good.
And I think a big reason for that expectation is that the personnel in mostly depth continues to improve since Coach Prime has gotten here. And you've seen coaching changes that have gotten better with the guy that he hires, replacing the prior coach. We're going to nitpick stuff because that's what we do. We got to point out the bad with the good, but generally I saw this as a program that was trending legitimately in the right direction. And I think the remaining haters that are out there still kind of fail to acknowledge that this is a program built on hard work. They're not going to necessarily push the limits in terms of their allowable practice hours, but for those hours that they do practice, it's going to be game speed. And I think generally outside of a handful of games, well, not even a handful, just their losses this past season, that I think you saw that kind of create this competitiveness within the program that we haven't seen in a bit.
No, for sure. I think, and we can talk about that. I know we've got a lot of things on our list, and I think part of the things we'll talk about is looking forward is just Prime himself and what he's built. And I think that's, when I look at my biggest takeaway from the first 2 years, it's really I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into when he came. We knew it was going to be exciting. We knew that there was going to be a lot of buzz. And that, we're hopeful that he was going to be able to recruit, and we knew he was going to bring some high level talent with him already. But it's really he's so much more substantive than I thought, or that I, knew that he'd be. There were question marks, and as much as we've heard it and now we've seen it play out, the real difference between, Dion, the coach, and, Coach Prime, the media mogul, and that, the persona that he puts out is so different. And, he really is substantive. He really is working hard at it. He's built a good team from a talent perspective, and there's still, there are still areas that need to be shored up, and that's always a continuous thing. I think, everybody, again, like you said, you can nitpick some of the stuff, but generally his staff moves in the last year have been positive, and so there's some belief that that he'll be able to continue supplementing and upgrading his staff. And it's just it just feels like we're in a different world, and sometimes you look back on the last 2 years and it's a little bit surreal. But yeah, I have a lot of faith, I guess, at this point. Maybe that's the other word too, besides expectation, is a lot of faith that as we move forward through this transition, because this is a transition year, that things are going to be good on the backside of it.
Today's episode is brought to us by Macaulay Capital Fractional CFO Services. Is your business looking for financial guidance and support, but not yet big enough to hire a full-time CFO? Well, we have a solution for you. Hiring a fractional CFO who can work with your business on a part-time basis. You get the benefit of having a seasoned financial expert on your team without the commitment or expense of a full-time hire. And here's the best part. It's likely that a partnership with Macaulay Capital will be a win-win situation, meaning that your business will make more money from the guidance of a fractional CFO than the total cost of partnering with us. For more information or to set up a meeting, please visit MacaulayCapital.com. That's MCCAULEY Capital.com. Thanks to Macaulay Capital for continuing to sponsor Buff Stampede Radio. Sean, our other sponsor, the Hungry Toad, is a place we got to get you to. It's just what is that, north of Pearl Street in Boulder. And William and I went there during Colorado's second bye week. And I got to tell you, it's the best French onion soup I've ever had. You've never been there, correct?
I have never been. I think I was traveling when you
Okay.
guys went up during the bye week, so I wasn't able to go up and enjoy that with you guys. But yeah, definitely looking forward to having a meal at the Toad.
Hanson Rada is the man. He's going to hook us up when we get up there, Sean. The Hungry Toad, bringing a taste of England to Boulder since 1991. They serve up hearty homemade fare from a scratch kitchen paired with a brilliant selection of British beers. They are the perfect spot for friends and family to gather, relax, and enjoy the warm, welcoming atmosphere. If you're mad for football, so are they. Whether it's the American gridiron or European footy, the Hungry Toad supports proudly CU football and CU women's soccer. Boulder's local pub that's not on Pearl Street. Another takeaway, Sean, would be that this program has to be more balanced going forward. And don't get me wrong, if you tell me you can sign up for Shador Sanders and Travis Hunter to be Buffaloes in 2025, I'm signing up for that every time. But
Absolutely.
they're moving on. And I think that is going to be the key is for this program. How well do they become no more hero ball? You can't rely on one or two players in Shador and Travis because they are phenomenal talents. We're able to pull that off a lot. But going forward, I think that's going to be the key for this program. What do you see before we could recap kind of our favorite moments from this past season as maybe your thought with this team going into the offseason in terms of what transition needs to take place?
I think the big question mark is the one that everybody's been talking about, and it is really, you know, how much of what Pat Shermer was doing with the offense over the last, year and two games was personnel based and came down to what, I think the preconception that it was Shador's offense and excuse me, and he was making the calls and he was doing so. I think there's a little bit to that in terms of what he was doing at the line. But I think really what it comes down to is an offensive coordinator is going to call a game that, very specifically his quarterback is comfortable with. And he's going to do the things that take advantage of his quarterback's talents and also try to limit, whatever his deficiencies are. And so I think that's a lot of what we saw. I think when it came down to an offensive line that still is continuing to develop and grow. And when it comes down to the talents that you have on the field from your quarterback to your receiving core, it was, I think there was a balance, at least in his mind, that, when a play needed to be made, I think Shador had complete confidence that he was the guy that was going to be able to make that play. And I think that, the staff was much the same way and Shermer was the same way. So we did see a very, unbalanced approach. So I think that changes as we move forward, but to what degree and how successfully is still, it's still up in the air. I definitely don't think that Pat Shermer has forgotten how to coach. I know that he's had success in places. A lot of the local fan base, takes. I think that they put a lot of his last year in Denver with the Broncos as kind of his body of work, and if you look at a bigger picture, he has had success with offenses and with quarterbacks that weren't of Shador's level or weren't that all-star quarterback. So I think when you're building something, you have to have some. I think he almost has to prove to me that he cannot do it before I am ready to throw in the towel and say, yeah, he's not the right guy. We need to look to get somebody more creative, more balanced, whatever. And so I think we'll see some differences. I think we'll see, we still will see a lot of the same stuff. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think those are the areas, the same ones that everybody else is touching on, all the fan bases, is that, the running game's got to improve. I do think that there are some things in place that are just going to organically make that happen next year. But you've got to improve the offensive line. Potentially, you've got to improve the backs, and you've got to have a real commitment to it. And I think we'll start to see that coming forward
Yeah,
next year.
yeah, good stuff. I think Pat Shermer, his set of circumstances the past couple of years were so different than what a normal OC would have
Right.
in not even really 2 full years, because it was only the final month of the 2023 season. So I am anxious to see what he can do. I think that honestly was maybe the biggest bummer of the Alamo Bowl, is just the disjointed nature of that offense in that football game. It just left you with a bad taste going in the offseason, but obviously it's going to be a much different type of situation offensively and what they're running. And then I think that, Sean, everybody that's a Colorado fan has got this going, that Robert Livingston is a defensive coordinator in
Right.
Boulder in this upcoming season, because I think it's pretty clear he is a rising star as a coach. Finding that right balance between, like you talked about, tailoring it towards personnel, but also maximizing their potential. And it wasn't perfect, but gosh, it was pretty impressive to watch, just the way that his defense played with so much aggression. And clearly, he is somebody that can get guys to play at this level, even though they might have just joined the program. Like Nakai Hill Green just looked like he was shot out of a cannon after he didn't start that first game. And so that's the other piece of it. I think if Robert Livingston is your DC in 2025, you feel really good about that group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they have a lot of key places, key pieces in place on, from a coaching staff perspective too. They've got to obviously replace a few guys, but I like and we'll get more into depth with this, I think, as we start talking about that. But I like the approach that Prime has taken. I think that, like with the whole NIL thing, and that's part of what drives this, but also some other, NCAA changes. I think he's been kind of on the forefront with just a select handful of teams with how he's going about building his staff. And I think he's doing it in a way that is going to pay dividends and be successful in what, I think we all can agree is a rapidly changing college football environment, right?
Yeah, I mean, every year is a reload now, a rebuild or a reload, depending
Yep.
where your program is, and that is the way it's going to be. And uh, it's tough because you don't form those initial attachments, but as the season plays out, like I feel like by the time senior day came around, those guys had endeared themselves in winning at that point 8 games had helped with that. But I feel like there still is that element. It just takes a little bit more time to kind of warm up to a team now.
Yep. And I think that's a key, that's a key thing with how you go about this roster management in this new GM, type era is while a lot of these guys that you're bringing in are, I think what you would consider in the past to be a mercenary, and maybe even still, have that. You look at a guy like Nakai Hill Green, who comes in for the 1 year. Nobody really knows a whole lot about him, but now when you see him, whatever was behind it, whatever and a lot of these stories never come out. I mean, Prime keeps a pretty tight lid on a lot of stuff, but you see him leaving, and now he's going to play at Alabama. So there's a mercenary aspect, but you've got to find players, and this is a key difference between, I think, 2024 and 2023, players who buy in to the here and now, and
Mhm.
know that team success is what's going to drive individual success, not the other way around. And so there was, I think there was a real good ability to identify the right type of players that were going to come in, that were going to work together, buy in, and that they were going to be CU buffs. They weren't, they weren't just going to be a rental player. And so they all embraced it. They came together. it was a real, there was a real family feel. Those guys really liked each other. They enjoyed playing together regardless of what's happening now in the off season and where players may be heading. And I think you're seeing, with that too, at least so far. I know there will be changes as things shake out and we get to the second transfer portal and the guys start seeing really where they slot into a roster with newcomers and development and such. But I'm pleasantly surprised at the relatively low numbers of outgoing transfers through this first window. It's, I mean, there's some that hurt and there's some that were expected. Maybe some unexpected ones, but overall, I think the guys that are here really want to, that are at CU really want to be there.
Yeah.
And they're building a really good culture, and they're building an environment where it's a requirement that you're going to buy in and you're going to be fully committed. And I think Prime's shown over the first 2 years too that if you're not that guy, he's not going to mess around, and he's not going to, he's not going to let you be a detriment to the team. He's just as happy to move you out as he was to move you in.
Back in, was that 2011, John Embry tried to kind of create this type of professional environment,
Right.
but it was too early. The
Yeah.
transfer portal wasn't there. And so you weren't able to reload. I mean, they were only able to, Sean, back then. I mean, what? They would get like two or three transfers in an offseason total.
Right.
Um, and so you're starting to see kind of what John Embry thought would work now work because you have this ability to replace a guy that is not willing to work or is a cancer in your locker room. And so it's crazy because this all began, I think, with player empowerment, but on some level, it's almost become more power for the program, the college and the coach to actually kind of manage their roster in this new era.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think part of it too is just that within the new environment, that that movement of play excuse me, that movement of players, whether it's player driven or coach staff driven, program driven, it's just more accepted. I mean, even 2 years ago when Prime came in and made his pronouncements, and then all of a sudden, there's all the negative stories about him just moving out all the dead weight and the guys that weren't going to play in his program, whether it was talent related or whether it was, that buy-in or getting rid of the mentality, the losing mentality of players that, I mean, winning's not necessarily inherited. It's a learned trait, and you've got to understand how to do it. And that's one of those areas where you look at guys that aren't accustomed to winning, don't know how to do it. And there was such an uproar with that. But now you're, even just, 18 months down the road, and there are other staffs around college football that are employing the same tactics, and there's no negativity, and we know a lot of that negativity was Prime based, but it's just accepted, and so I think we've very quickly evolved into this. Hey, it is more of a business. It's not college football as it's not your dad's college football anymore, where guys are in a program for their 4 or 5 years, and you really get to know them. It's a business, and from either party, we can have movement in and out, and it's nobody's getting in their feelings about it, right? There's disappointments and such, but nobody's really looking at it, and nobody's a bad guy for doing it. It's a business. So,
And thankfully, when they kick the ball off, it's still a beautiful sport. And that's
right.
what we are always going to hang on to, and why I think even with the challenges that college football has been facing, is going to be facing, because we know that this is not settled yet. They've got a lot of stuff to figure out in this sport. But when they kick that ball off, I think you forget all that stuff. And with that said, Sean, I'm curious what your favorite moment was during the Colorado Buffaloes 2024 season.
Yeah, there were so many big ones. I think when I look back on it, and I think it's my favorite because of the emotions that I felt at the time, but then also, some of it is a little retrospective, but how I really felt like it was one of those key. Every season has turning points. Every season has these moments where things can flip one direction or another. And so for me, it has to be the ending of the Baylor game. It was not it was not Colorado's best performance throughout the game. There were a lot of struggles, but for the way that ended, for that, that magical ending, offensive ending, I guess, at least with Shador's Hail Mary and LeJohntay being able to maneuver back around the defender and dive, make that diving catch before the ball hit the ground. That was magical in itself, which was just, exacerbated by Travis Hunter's goal line stop, the goal line fumble on
Yeah.
the other. And
They kind of go hand in hand. It's hard to mention one
right.
without the other, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's those are the two sides to that coin, and it was CU's two star players, right, making those type of plays when they needed to make them. But the whole press box, and I know you and I, when that happened, we were, well, I think you may have already been heading down. I don't
I
remember, but
was I was ready to hit the post game press conference. Not
yeah,
that I didn't, not that I had given up. I'm still watching it, but I got to get up there. And I hate to bring this up, but when Will Shepherd dropped that pass, like,
right,
it was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is not going to be a fun post game press conference. Um, and I don't know if this is a controversial take. Michael Westbrook, amazing moment, miracle at Michigan. It will go down as one of the greatest plays in college football history. But what LeJohntay did was more impressive. Like just the way he snaked his way
yep,
around that defender. Like every time I see that, it goes, man, this was such a low probability of this actually happening. And LeJohntay Wester, and it was a great throw by Shador as well, but that might have been the best catch given the circumstances in this program's history. I'm sure I'm going to get debated with some other people, but at least for me, that was pretty much the pinnacle of a receiver stepping up in a big moment.
yeah, no, absolutely. Um, and it was a moment where I think everybody had resigned themselves to a loss. At
Yeah.
least in the press box, it was. I don't think anybody was sitting there actively. Those that were left that hadn't already moved down and started taking the walk down to the post game press conference. Nobody was sitting at their laptops. Everybody was kind of standing up behind the press row desk and was ready to try to figure out how to assess where the program was going. It could have easily started to feel like, well, maybe there hasn't been a significant step taken from 2023. And then, you kind of and there were magic moments like that Shador produced in 2023, but you kind of forget about that, and then it happens, and all of a sudden you realize that there's some special players and some special talent out on the field, and that maybe this is going to be a little bit of a magical next step season, when that touchdown happens. And then when you get to the flip side of the coin and you get to Travis making that play on the goal line, when that happened, I think the feeling was really more of, I think anybody that questioned whether they believed at that point, I think that question was starting to be answered. There was something that was special, and that was a big key turning point to the rest of the season.
Yeah, and frankly, I think that catapulted Travis Hunter's Heisman campaign, because if there was one thing you were going to say about Travis Hunter, it's, well, he's not as physical as we want. And then he wins a football game by forcing a fumble at the goal line. And that was never honestly a fair criticism if you had watched Colorado, but because he didn't rack up big tackle numbers. Again, that was a question that was posed to Coach Prime of like, if that's the case, you're not doing your job as a cornerback. And I had LeJontay Wester's catch number one on my list, but I think in a 1B would be Travis Hunter at his acceptance speech saying "Sco Buffs" and putting up the horns on national TV, and you had the tribute to Rashawn Salam and seeing Colorado on that setting, and Brian and I are down on Times Square doing a video afterwards. Like
Right.
it was like, Sean, you got to pinch me.
Yeah.
What reality am I living in here?
Well, and that was actually, in my notes was my off the field favorite moment was the Heisman night.
Yeah.
And that's a not only was Travis Hunter a once in a generational, once in a lifetime type player for your program, but but a Heisman Trophy is the same scenario. It's puts Colorado in some very elite company with multiple Heisman winners. But I think what even supersedes that award was the how genuine um the acceptance speech was and all the stuff around that moment. And it's definitely become, there's a big difference in the way the Heisman is covered between today and when Rashawn Salam won it. There's a lot more, there's a lot more pomp and circumstance and television and everything around it. So I think you've got the ability for a personality to almost transcend the award, and that's what seemed to happen for me on that night. And I think everybody always knew Travis Hunter was a good kid, and he was different, and he's a little quirky, a bit of a nerd, and all those sort of things, but definitely not a guy you could ever root against as a person. And then to see a lot of that just come out and really be highlighted because he's another one of those, or maybe the prototypical guy that when he came in here last year, he was very media unsavvy. Is that a word? Unsavvy? He was not media savvy, right?
Yeah.
Didn't want to do interviews, didn't really want to speak in front of people. And when he did, he was fine, but he was just, answers were short. It just wasn't his comfort zone. And to see, his growth over the course of 2 seasons with the media and his comfort level, and to really get a more in-depth, closer, look at his personality and who he really is. And then that all just kind of culminated on that evening. And it was, I don't know, that was my top off the field moment of 2024.
And unfortunately, the week after that kind of proved that the haters, I guess, are just not going to go away. And
Right.
so, that was unfortunate. Did you have a worst moment with this team in
Yeah, and I
2024?
think almost for the very flip coin side of it, the of the best moment was the Kansas State game and the way that thing ended. Another game that that CU did not play its best football for 4 quarters. But they stayed in the game. They weren't playing great. They came back and managed to give everybody that same feeling by taking that lead, right at the end of the 4th quarter. And, and I think it was almost inconceivable that after marching down and scoring and taking the lead that they were going to give it up. And to have Kansas State, and Avery Johnson, who really
Had not made a play downfield all game
right,
until that
right.
point.
Well, and he's, and he is not, he's not a prolific, thrower of the football. And for him to come down and just connect on two big plays, and for them to score on a 2-play drive and retake the lead, it was just such a deflating moment. And there was still a little modicum of hope after that because you were putting the ball back in Shador's hands. But It did almost feel like, asking for another miracle, a second comeback in that game, was just too much to ask. And that was, that was another one of those turning points where I really do feel like if you figure out how to hang on and win that Kansas State game, I think it really has the potential to change, the end of the season as well. It not only does it give you another win and puts you in a different place, and now you're not, even if you drop Kansas, you're not necessarily needing help to get into the championship game. But I think potentially it elevates your current team to just another level where that belief and that drive is just exacerbated. And I think you potentially go on and do much bigger things. And I think that loss, way more than the Nebraska loss, that was so early, but that loss, I think really is what kept CU from turning a special season into, a truly magical season.
I'd say from a personal standpoint, my worst moments were driving back out of Nebraska after covering that football game and trying to drive into Lubbock. That was a adventure trying to get down there. You and the DNVR guys, I think, hit the window perfectly to get down to Lubbock.
Yeah.
But the rest of us all had an adventure. And what was it, 23 and a half hours or something like that I spent in the car just
Yeah,
trying
that's
to get
brutal.
down there, which is just nuts. But the other thing too is I'm bummed out about Ralphie 6, Sean, because you know why? I don't want to. It's a great story. This is a bison that was an orphan
Right.
that had a rough upbringing, and you want this story to have this comeback, but it's not going to happen. And I think pregame at the Alamo Bowl, it was like we got and I don't want to be the person that has to say these things out loud publicly because just figure it out. Like all I want to do is praise that Ralphie program because I know how much work that those handlers put in and how much care they put into that. But uh especially when the Folsom Frenzy podcast guys put out the video I had of Ralphie 5 running at the Alamo Bowl in 2016 compared to Ralphie 6's run in San Antonio last weekend, like it was like it hurt me, Sean. It hurt
No,
me inside.
absolutely. And it's and I think too is CU and Ralphie have established, that program have established themselves as the premier, the best mascot in college sports. And that's a legacy and a tradition that you have. And unfortunately, this Ralphie is tarnishing that legacy. It's become, it's gone from a maybe it was a little bit cute, in the last few years as she was growing up,
Yeah.
because you're still hoping that maybe there's a point where where she turns the corner. But now it's kind of become, a running joke in terms of her runs. And you've got wagers being placed on, whether or not she's gonna make it past the 30. Is she gonna get to the 50? Um, and then yeah, that stroll that she took in the Alamo Bowl was pretty disheartening. And I'll say, to me, it was kind of embarrassing for where that Ralphie program has been in its history. So no, I would agree that's pretty disappointing, and they've got to figure, something out. I know it's probably not easy, and I think in the grand scheme of things, it's probably low on their priority to figure out how to bring a new Ralphie in, but I think it's time.
Yeah. And hopefully if that's the case, Ralphie 6, I've heard from folks in that program, the Ralphie Handler program, that she really likes people. It just running is not her thing.
Right.
So finding a nice niche for her, like I remember Ralphie 5 would go to the corral before the games, and
Mhm.
there is a role for Ralphie 6 going forward. And yeah, I don't
Sure.
know where this priority is on their thing, and it feels like kind of beating a dead horse because that video's out there. And so I don't even think people need us to comment on this to know that there should be a new Ralphie in the future at some point. What was your favorite game in 2024?
I think my favorite game might have been, even though I didn't make the trip, might have been UCF. Um, and I know there are a lot of, reasons and sweat stains why that was maybe your least favorite game, Adam,
Fair
but,
enough, fair enough.
but no, for me that there were a lot of question marks about the defense, still at that point in time. It was early enough in the season. UCF was very hyped at that point in time. Their rushing offense was I believe the number one rushing offense in the country going into that week. If not the number one, they were in the top three. RJ Harvey was just destroying teams. Um, and granted, it was kind of the kickoff to conference play, and so there were some questions about the caliber of opponent. But to see the way CU went down to Orlando and really just I think from a defensive standpoint dominated the majority of the game, and most of UCF's yards came very late in the game. Um, and but they controlled it, they dominated it, and you didn't really, I don't know that UCF was as poor of a team as they finished the season, because it seemed like after that game things started unraveling for them, right?
Yeah.
They started having some some mid-season player defections, and then you've got a coaching, Gus Malzahn decides that he's done, and things just really fell apart from what I think their their fan base and their program thought going into the season, that was going to be their kind of magical season. And it just goes to show too, like how up or down, in college football right now, things are so year to year. And it's not, I think getting off topic here, but I think the media and the pundits and all the people that look at college football and their ability to evaluate a team just based upon what they did last year, and whether they feel they're going to continue that, or surpass it by a game or two, or maybe have a slight drop off. It's all a crapshoot anymore.
Yeah.
You've got a completely different team every year. But I came out of that game feeling like this is a defense that can play, with a lot of teams in the country, and that this is CU's they've got a good team. They're a really good football team.
Yeah. You touched on a lot of great stuff there. I do think you're right. I think that loss ruined UCF for the rest of the season, because that was a really solid football team going into that game. And you had transfers leaving, and they had put a lot of their recruiting eggs into that weekend. And one of those guys on campus, Christian Hudson, ended up flipping from UCF, and it was kind of this snowball effect for that program. I would say that game, Oklahoma State, and trying to think back, Arizona, probably the three most complete efforts by this Colorado team.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think back. Those were the most lopsided games from this past season. And Texas Tech ended up being pretty lopsided by the end as well. My favorite game, though, Sean, I think I got to go CSU, because that came after the Nebraska loss.
Right.
And there was this feeling that if something goes wrong here, not that, many thought that Colorado State was going to win that game, but it was in their stadium. It was with Colorado coming off that loss again in Lincoln. And there was a lot of pressure on this football team going in there. And for them to really leave no doubt, and to make some special plays. I think back to the Travis Hunter play, where he gets the interception, where he's basically running the route better than the
Right.
receiver was. There were a lot of great moments in that football game, and um, you don't have to think back and wonder what it would be like if they lost that game, but it could have gotten pretty dicey if they didn't do what they did in Fort Collins. And especially there's now this break in the series, so you've got that long-standing bragging rights there. But yeah, the Oklahoma State game too. I mean, to win 52-0 against that program, even as down as they were this year, and to still have that hope at the end of the day that you could watch some football the next day and see if Colorado would get into the Big 12 championship game. Obviously, that didn't happen, but that was a big game. But to me, CSU is probably my favorite game. Thinking back on the season, who are you going to miss most off this squad in 2025?
I mean, I think it's easy, it's easy to say Travis and Shador, but because they bring an element that's really irreplaceable. So there's, so they would be up there, but I think, for me, it's going to be more guys uh, like Cam Silman Craig, you know, uh, a real, I mean, talented in his own right, but a gritty, hard worker, hard-nosed player, but a real leader, a real ability to, um, while he did not have the same type of spotlight as some of the other guys, I think he had a real ability to kind of connect with the media and to I think he was always a really good interview and a real good leader on the team. I'm gonna miss, a guy, even though he was, ended up being that 1 year rent a player type guy. I'm gonna miss Nakai Hill Green he was so much fun to watch. Um, so I'm gonna miss him. In some respects, kind of, in the same vein as Cam. I'm gonna miss a guy like Bentley who came in and he, talented in his own right, but he had some deficiencies, but the guy just worked his butt off.
Yeah.
And Livingston, really found a way to utilize him as a player to maximize his potential. And that didn't always show up in the stats, but when you're watching film and you're seeing some of the things that he's doing and how he was a player um who embraced making the right play for his teammates to finish plays, was something that I really enjoyed watching. There's so many plays he made that he got no stats for. Where he was filling a gap. He was blowing up an offensive lineman, both from the interior and they lined him up on the edge quite a bit when they went, into a bear front. And the guy just, made a lot of those plays. LeJonte is a guy, again, another 1 year guy that came in, but, not only a dynamic playmaker, but just, I think he, from the offensive side, had a lot of that leadership, and people listened to him and was, had such a great personality. Um, and then another guy who maybe, really didn't love the spotlight and you didn't get to see a ton of his personality, a little quieter guy, BJ Green, again, another guy that was here for just 1 year that you just really grew to respect what he did. And much like, I think much like Bentley, he's a guy that he ended up by the end of the year putting up a lot of stats, but there were so many games that you watched where he embraced, in this final season, doing some of the dirty work, and setting hard edges and blowing up, pulling, guards from the other side and really sacrificing himself to make the play that allowed his teammates to get, to make a tackle. And then just an all around, I think very humble, great guy. And so it's a lot of those guys that aren't, they weren't OBs. They weren't in the program for a long period of time, but but you really had the ability to appreciate what they did, especially this season. And and each of their personalities in their own right, and they're going to be, they're going to be tough guys to replace, but that's college football. I mean, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
And you're looking for the next guys, but what I really take away from those guys is that was beyond their play on the field was the ability of those guys to really come together, and form a real team family bond in a short period of time that was more than lip service, right? That they really, they managed to bring in a bunch of guys that were good dudes, that respected each other, that got along, that were all pulling in the same direction, and at the end of the day, they all really seem to like each other. And I think that's one of the big challenges in this portal era, this NIL era, is finding that right mesh. So to have so many of those guys, all come in together, build that, over the course of the season, and then, head their different ways, whether it's to the NFL or another school or whatever it may be. It's, there's a lot of guys that are going to be missed. But so I guess that's a long answer that didn't really answer your question. I don't know that there's a specific guy that I'm going to miss the most, but this is a team that I think I'm really gonna, that I'll look back on, from a player standpoint, and really appreciate this team even more, in 5 years.
Yeah, I think your answer captures it best in the sense that it's hard to pick out one or two guys, and that goes to the likability factor that this team had. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I had a bunch of names written down. You mentioned most of them. Chidozie Nwankwo would
Yeah.
be, another guy that I just really enjoy kind of the dirty work that he had in the trenches, and a guy like Ben Finiseth that just exudes pure joy and was so fun to watch on special teams units. And we could probably spend the next half an hour mention some other guys too, but there were so many characters that were really likable on this football team. Well, that said, Sean, what was the best press box food that you had in
Well, I missed a
2024?
couple of them. But I would have to say, because it's the only one that I even that I even remember, I couldn't tell you what Nebraska had in their press box. I don't remember what they had. Um, I remember that the Kansas deal with it being at Arrowhead was a little bit different, and I remember that setting, but I don't remember the food we had. But I'd have to say Texas Tech. Like,
That's the only answer here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they put on a really, really good spread, a big spread, a lot of variety. And and it was, in some ways, it was like a 3 or 4 course meal, not only with the food they had out before they brought the main food, and then they were continuing to, as the game went on, there, bring out popcorn and ice cream, and and goodies, and they went through multiple courses. So I think that was by far the best press box food.
Yeah,
um
I think if memory serves, they had a hot dog bar, a burger
yeah,
bar, a barbecue area, a baked potato bar, a nacho bar,
nacho bar, yeah.
a whole dessert area, a wing of the press box.
Yep.
And then you and I were sitting there, and we had a big screen, flat screen TV that we both got to watch the game through, watching the replays during the game. Then they kick off and these tortillas start flying, and all of a sudden my thoughts on Texas Tech change a little bit. And that was another moment where I hated, because I didn't want to be the fun police. I want there to be college football traditions, but
Right.
that was simply not safe what was happening
Yeah, it
in
went
terms of the
overboard.
objects being thrown down there.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it went overboard. And it was, and there was, that's a fun tradition that, when it's done on the opening kickoff of the half or whatever, which is generally the case, great. It's, let them have their thing. It's unique. It's fun, but it also, not only did it continue throughout the game and become a player safety issue, but it became vitriolic. There was a lot of animosity and hate and a lot of the things that you heard, obviously we couldn't hear them from the press box, but a lot of the things that you heard being yelled to the players as they're throwing those things. Um, and but it also goes to uh how unique and special, some of these guys were on this team, that despite all of that, at the end of the game, you've got, Shador Sanders autographing a tortilla that he tries to throw back into the stands. It frisbees on him and doesn't make the stands, and you've got a member of the media, one of the press guys, who sees it all happen and races down and finds that tortilla in the corner and gets it framed and whatever. But
We were telling him he should put that up on eBay.
right, right. But for the level of vitriol that there was, and some of the things that were being yelled to the players as they, were throwing those tortillas down. For Shador's reaction, rather than being a negative, spiteful reaction, to just sign a tortilla and toss it back to whoever's saying these negative things about him. I think I think that speaks a little bit to who these guys really are, even though, some of the public, the perception of their public personas is not always positive, that, people don't like the flash and whatever. And that's deserved as well. But, I think at their core, there really are a bunch of good guys, and they're, while they're young men and they've got more money than, a lot of us still ever dream of having, at some level, they're still kids too, right? And
Yeah.
then to see them just embracing and enjoying both the positive and the negative, and not getting, bound up in a lot of that is, I don't know, I respect that a lot.
Yeah, we've got so much more to cover this offseason, Sean. We've got about an hour here. We're going to be back with a new show soon. So definitely check that out. I'm going to be back with a show on Monday with William Gardner. So much to talk about. And that's the fun part of covering these Coach Prime buffs, is that there is never a lack of content out there. So we're going to be back with another show soon. I appreciate you, Sean. And thanks for hopping on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Always a good time.